3. And notwithstanding any other provision of law, all indebtedness of the administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency under any notes or other obligations issued pursuant to Section 1309A of the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968, 42 U.S.C. 74016A, and Section 15E of the Federal Insurance Act of 1956, 42 U.S.C. 2414E, and outstanding as of the date of the enactment of this Act, is hereby cancelled. The Administrator and the National Flood Insurance Fund are relieved of all liability to the Secretary of the Treasury under any such notes or other obligations, including for any capitalized interest due under such notes or other obligations and any other fees and charges payable in connection with such notes and obligations, and the total amount of notes and obligations issued by the administrator pursuant to such section shall be considered to be reduced by such amount for purposes of the limitation on such total amount under such section. 2. Use of savings. Effective on and after October 1, 2031, the Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency shall use any savings accruing from the cancellation of debt under paragraph 1, including any amounts of interest payments avoided from such cancellation, only for deposit in and use under the National Flood Insurance Reserve Fund under Section 1310A of the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968, 42 U.S.C. 4017A. 3. Treatment of cancelled debt. The amount of the indebtedness cancelled under paragraph 1 may be treated as a public debt of the United States. B. Flood hazard mapping and risk analysis. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency for fiscal year 2022, out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $3 billion, to remain available until expended, for necessary expenses for flood hazard mapping and risk analysis, which shall be in addition to, and shall supplement, 1. Amounts otherwise available for those purposes, including amounts appropriated to the National Flood Insurance Fund established under Section 1310 of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 4017, and 2. Any funds provided to the Administrator by states and local governments under Section 1360, F. 2, of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 4101, F. 2. C. Means-tested assistance for National Flood Insurance Program policyholders. 1. Appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency for fiscal year 2022, out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $1 billion, to remain available until September 30, 2026. To carry out a means-tested program under which the Administrator provides assistance to eligible policyholders in the form of graduated discounts for insurance costs with respect to covered properties. 2. Terms and conditions. A. Discounts. The administrator shall use funds provided under this subsection to establish graduated discounts available to eligible policyholders under this subsection, with respect to covered properties, which may be based on the following factors. I. The percentage by which the household income of the eligible policyholder is equal to, or less than, 120% of the area median income for the area in which the property to which the policy applies is located. 2. The number of eligible policyholders participating in the program authorized under this subsection. 3. The availability of funding. Four, any other factor that the administrator finds reasonable and necessary to carry out the purposes of this subsection. B. Distribution of premium, with respect to the amount of the discounts provided under this subsection in a fiscal year, and any administrative expenses incurred in carrying out this subsection for that fiscal year, the administrator shall, from amounts made available to carry out this subsection for that fiscal year, deposit in the National Flood Insurance Fund established under Section 1310 of the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968, 42 U.S.C. (4017), an amount equal to those discounts and administrative expenses, except to the extent that Section 1310A of the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968, 42 U.S.C. 4017A, applies to any portion of those discounts or administrative expenses, in which case the administrator shall deposit an amount equal to those amounts to which such Section 1310A applies in the National Flood Insurance Reserve Fund established under such Section 1310A. C. Requirement on timing. Not later than 21 months after the date of the enactment of this section, the administrator shall issue interim guidance to implement this subsection, which shall expire on the later of I. the date that is 60 months after the date of the enactment of this section, or 2. the date on which a final rule issued to implement this subsection takes effect. 3. Definitions in this subsection. A. Administrator. The term administrator means the administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. B. Covered property. The term covered property means I. A primary residential dwelling designed for the occupancy of from 1 to 4 families, or 2. Personal property relating to a dwelling described in Clause I. C. Eligible policyholder. The term eligible policyholder means a policyholder with a household income that is not more than 120% of the area median income for the area in which the property to which the policy applies is located. D. Insurance costs. The term insurance costs means, with respect to a covered property for a year, I. Risk premiums and fees estimated under Section 1307 of the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968, 42 U.S.C. 4014, and charged under Section 1308 of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 4015. 2. Surcharges assessed under Sections 1304 and 1308A of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 4011, 4015A. And 3. Any amount established under Section 1310A, c. of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 4017A. Sec. 40105. Community Restoration and Revitalization Fund. A. Appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Community Restoration and Revitalization Fund established under subsection B for fiscal year 2022, out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated. 1. $5.7 billion for awards of planning and implementation grants to eligible recipients to carry out community-led projects to stabilize neighborhoods and increase access to economic opportunity for residents by creating equitable civic infrastructure and creating or preserving affordable, accessible housing. 2. $500 million for awards of grants to eligible recipients to create, expand, and maintain community land trusts and shared equity homeownership, including through the acquisition, rehabilitation, and new construction of affordable, accessible housing. 3. $1 billion for the Secretary to provide technical assistance, capacity building, program support to applicants, potential applicants, and recipients of amounts appropriated for grants under this section. And 4. $300 million for the costs to the Secretary of administering and overseeing the implementation of this section, including information technology, financial reporting, research and evaluations, fair housing, compliance, and other cross-program costs in support of programs administered by the Secretary in this title. The Secretary may transfer and merge amounts appropriated under this paragraph to Section 40301. Amounts appropriated by this section shall remain available until September 30, 2031. B. Establishment of fund. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, in this section referred to as the Secretary, shall establish a Community Restoration and Revitalization Fund, in this section referred to as the Fund, to award planning and implementation grants on a competitive basis to eligible recipients as defined in this section for activities authorized under Title I of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. 42 U.S.C. 5301 et seq. For community-led projects that create civic infrastructure to support a community's social, economic, and civic fabric, create fair, affordable and accessible housing opportunities, prevent residential displacement, acquire and remediate blighted properties, and promote quality job creation and retention. C. Grants. 1. Geographical areas. The Secretary shall award grants from the fund to eligible recipients within geographical areas at the neighborhood, county, census tract, or census tract level, including census tracts adjacent to the project area that are areas in need of investment, and that have at least two of the following indicators. A. Dwelling unit sales prices that are lower than the cost to acquire and rehabilitate or build a new dwelling unit. B. High proportions of residential and commercial property